Hi folks, and welcome to this workshop. I'm just going to give you some quick tips here. It's about preparation. If you refer to your pack that lists the materials, the paints, type of brushes, the paper that I'm working on, you'll also find your references there, your image references, and make sure that in particular that your palette and your water tub are close together. You don't want to be reaching over your painting to reach the water one side and the paint's the other, because you'll end up with problems. So I'm right-handed, so everything goes over to the right-hand side of my painting area. Other than that, any notes that you've made yourself, have those to hand too. You may have made a few preliminary sketches. Have those to hand. It all helps get you through the sort of process when you're following a tutorial. If when you've done your completed your painting, please consider submitting it for inclusion in the critique. But good luck with everything. Happy painting. Had to redo the drawing in this intro for the workshop because human error on my part. I forgot to press the record button. So we'll review it. I'll make sure that exactly the same things were brought to your attention in this session. Yeah, I've just roughed it out to make sure that the end scene resembles the original as close as possible. And started with me talking about the importance of the grid. So let's just put those grid lines in and consider what we need the grid lines for and how useful they can be for us. So you can see here, I'm just using the ruler on this occasion to put those put the grid lines in. It's basically two equispaced verticals followed by two equispaced horizontals. And I haven't measured as such, but you could. I'm sort of guessing them. As long as you're not miles out, this will serve purpose. What this gives you, most importantly, is a few things. It's very helpful for a number of reasons. These are four intersections. These four intersections here are where you can potentially place your focal point. As you can see, we've chosen the upper right section there to place our main star of the role of this painting, and that's the white Croft, of course, the Scottish sort of farm-like building. The other benefits to putting a grid in really is so that you don't oversize things. With those vertical line there on the right hand side, you can compare that. I mean, you can put these grids over your photos if you print them off, or you can just simply envisage them like I tend to do, and you can use that grid to place specific strategic details, such as that chimney there. It's very close. You can see that it's very close to the right vertical, and that the measurement of that building just works its way in from right to left, and you can see the chimney doesn't quite reach the middle spot of that central square. So at least that way you're not going to end up making your building too long, too wide. The left-hand vertical will tell you what sort of resides in the scene around that area. So it's a very useful technique to apply the grid. So let's just erase those grid lines for a moment. And incidentally, I wouldn't normally. I used to. I was going to say I wouldn't normally put those grid lines physically onto my paper. But I certainly used to. But you get so used to it after a while, you can envisage them. You can sort of see them in your head. So I'll get rid of them for now, otherwise we'll get confused. So now we're going to get into the texture and how we break up the scene. Okay, what you'll notice, what I'm doing here is I'm making very bold and obvious vertical lines to tell me where that those winter trees are back there. Now, by complete comparison down here in the foreground, completely different shape that will outline the boulders in the grass here. And it's very important to make this, to be able to differentiate in an easy fashion, a quick glance of the scene, and you suddenly realize that you're looking at boulders in the grass down here. But it's surprising. It's all too easy sometimes just to sort of keep making the same marks. And although this is pencil work and a lot of it may be lost under paint and different mediums by the end of the painting, what this is really for is to be there as a guideline, as a roadmap while we're actually painting the scene. And you can go as bold as I am here with your pencil work if you wish. Particularly, I wouldn't do this if it was watercolor, but this is mixed media. And I would certainly consider going, perhaps a little bolder with your pencil work than you would normally. So let's look again at the different textures. Now, as I turn my attention to the other areas, so we've done some good verticals to suggest those winter trees in the background, that sort of horizontal bank of verticals that are either side of the house, the building. But what about these walls that are sort of just beyond the foreground here? They're sort of upper foreground rather than middle ground. I sort of see the house as middle ground. So we've got to use a more open texture for these smaller walls, these horizontals, just so that they look different from the foreground. Again, these foreground shapes are so obvious, so bold, but if we were to start putting small rock-like circular shapes in the walls, we wouldn't know where the vertical walls start and the foreground boulders stop. So what do? We have to use a sort of symbol. Our heads need to think in that sort of design fashion, showing one area off the other. Now, I got rid of that background sky because it would be too much texture. There would be texture at the top, texture through the middle ground, texture in the foreground. Okay, when really we certainly want texture. We want tonal values. Got to think about our edges, and then we need to think about how we create depth, of course. So you can see the scale of this first wall. By the first wall, I mean the wall that's, as I'm doing here, it's just in front, it's just behind, rather, these immediate foreground boulders strewn across this grassy foreground. And I'm putting a vertical line there to tell me that it's a different shape, it's a vertical. And then I'm looking at the texture of those areas must be more open. Foreground shapes are very tight. That's you can almost refer to it as a closed texture. It's very informative, it's obvious, but those horizontal walls, even though they're made up of the same objects, that is boulders and stones and rocks, you must be able to indicate that they do something different. Now, there's the corrugated, there's these sort of 3 sheets of corrugated steel. And what I liked about those initially, and I can talk retrospectively here, because of the luxury of being able to have painted this by this time. The painting had been finished. And I decided, I got quite excited about the corrugated sheeting. My own defence is, for good reason, they offered a strong horizontal against the verticals that were behind it, but we lost them in the end. I chose to play them down for reasons explained a bit further on. So let's get the house in here. Is the end. I put a window in that end there because I just felt as though it needed breaking up. So just put in the furthest chimney in place there. And that window, as I say, at the gable end just makes it a bit more interesting. Door on the porch or the lean-to, whatever this is referred to in these sort of old farm type buildings. Sort of dotting the I's, crossing the T's. So in front here, if you look at the photo, there's what looks like, there's a row back there, looks like there's storage of some sort. Maybe it's where they keep their firewood. So I made some little, just basically what I thought I saw in the photo. A little bit more inference of verticals back there because there was a continuation of the, the winter trees and bushes. I think you've got to remember all the time that you've got to, I don't know, I suppose not play games with your viewer. I always try to imagine what the person would be thinking if this was on a wall in a gallery. How's that going to impact upon a person? And I think they say the same thing about songs and music. Things will grab you within a couple of seconds usually. It will grab your attention in a couple of seconds. And then you need to pull your viewer in. And when you've pulled them in to look closer at your painting, you really need to sometimes just isolate shapes, make sure that you're showing these shapes off for what they are and not being too ambiguous about it. Make it obvious. This is why I play off verticals with horizontals and sometimes diagonals. Those are the best tools at your disposal for doing that, of saying this area is this and the area next to it is this. It's different. And that's exactly why I'm putting these directional lines now on the roof. The little dormer roofs come in one direction and the main body of that house roof comes down in another direction. It's all about directional lines to indicate different facets, different surfaces and angles in your objects and subject matter, or components that make up your painting. So if we put in a few more verticals in this nearer wall, coupled with a few stone faces, rock faces, we get a much better idea of what we're looking at. If you don't adopt this approach, you'll have a mess. You basically have a very busy cacophony of different shapes that won't make any sense. You'll just be far too busy. I'm going even bolder around these shapes in the foreground now. But here, as I go back again, look at how I'm chasing the line around these rocks and boulders in the foreground. There's absolutely no question then about what you're looking at. It's, you're not playing games, just making it so bold. There is, of course, a different texture to these things also. I wouldn't be going as bold with my pencil work in the line of winter trees back there. It would be too heavy. But in that foreground, when you can almost not overdo the bold delineation in those foreground shapes. And what I'm doing there is I'm just shading around the either side of my house of the croft. I'm almost treating this underlying drawing a bit like a sketch in a way, because my intention when we do get the paint going, we have to nail the focal point, and by just going around either side of it, thinking about how the darks complement the lights and vice versa. Keep your darkest darks next to your lightest lights, only for the focal point territory. It's like it's the dark and the light working together to create that powerful impact in that particular area. So I think we're ready now. I'm just looking at the drawing and weighing it all up, making sure I'm happy with everything as it stands. And I think we're ready to get some paints out and start having some fun. Yeah, we'll get some washes down next. So here are my materials. I'm using just it's not my watercolor paint, even though I'm using watercolors today. So I've got my ink. I have the Antelope Brown one, which I've used the FW. As far as the black ink, the Payne's Grey goes, use any black ink. This is just writing ink. This is calligraphy ink. Use any type of black ink. Be careful. Sometimes black inks, when they're watered down, will take on a bit of a blue color, but that shouldn't matter either. So there are my inks. These are my pastels, and I have various brands. They're just labeled oil pastel, studio oil pastel. This is Faber-Castell. These are Sennelier artist oil pastels, pale pink, pale yellow, pale blue. But as I say, I'm going to be a little bit careful as to when we use those. I've got my cards, a bit of credit card here, a bit of ordinary cardboard cut that will also move things around when we need to. And these are my watercolor paints. So let's get something going. Let's start by, oh, ignore those there. Sorry, they're just dried out bits of watercolor paint from a previous session. So I'm going to put out some fresh, must be fresh paint, folks, from the tube. Don't go trying to use something like this that might be sat in your palettes. You'll be there all day. Okay. Something that is obvious when I work. It's sometimes the speed at which I work, and that's. There's many reasons why I do that, but one of the main reasons, and I'll go into the other reasons later, one of the main reasons is I'm able to work quickly because it's always fresh paint. If you want a lot of paint quickly and you're relying on dried out things like this, scrubbing away like mad, you'll never get there, okay? It's just, by the time you've got enough paint, if you ever get enough paint from dried out paint like that, what you wanted to do when it should have been still damp from the previous wash, that's gone too dry. So you'll end up with horrible dry brush marks in your paints. So I'm putting out a bit of burnt sienna, a bit of ultramarine blue, and this is like, imagine, like a jogger or a runner would just sort of go outside, stretch the legs, stretch the arms, warm up a little bit. This will just settle us down a little bit. Okay, let me just show you how much of this. Don't be faint-hearted about this. Let's pick up almost equal amounts of both colors for the moment, okay? No. So what have I got there? It's, if you look at it, if you really look at it close, it's something like a darkened down, a grayed down olive green. Okay, because there's a lot of yellow in burnt sienna. I'm just going to go in around the back here, and I'm going to take my time putting this in. Now remember, this is watercolor. It will dry out a lot lighter. It's, in fact, look how quickly it's lightening off there. So you've got to compensate for that. You've got to overdo it in a way. I'm coming down to about this area here, just above where we know there are some bushes, dried out winter bushes and things. I'm just cutting around my building a little more carefully. And look at that, I'm pushing the brush back and forth, almost like a sweeping brush over the floor here, okay? This is why, again, we need cheaper brushes and not expensive, precious brushes. So I'm creating what I hope to be a sort of interesting edge to this area. Come down into this, come down a little bit now. Now I'm going to change this. It's very flat, isn't it? It's almost as though I've got the paints way too thoroughly mixed and integrated, so it's become one color. So I'm just picking up a bit of the blue this time. Look at that, right at the edge of this big puddle on the palette. And with that, I will perhaps just go back up into here. Now, the more variegated and that looks at the back there, the better, really. I mean, within reason. Don't spend the next half an hour playing up here. You just want to make sure that there are some differences back here, a little bit of warmth closer to the house. Perhaps this blue should live a bit further up the top of this area here. And what I said earlier about this is a way of settling yourself, of getting yourself just comfortable, getting something going. Now I've just popped my fingertips into my water tub there, and I'll just flick a little bit of water into that. And I'm not going to try and suggest that, you know, these are the sheep on the background. They can be whatever your imagination wants them to be, but it just offers a little bit of subtle information back there, the hint of something, whether those are gorse bushes or sheep or whatever, or boulders sticking out the ground. It's enough. But this almost flat background acts as a sort of counterfoil to the busyness that's going to come. Now then, I think it's really important, while we've got this mix on the go here, to consider, remember, we've got some very pale shapes in the form of those corrugated sheets here. So I'm going to make sure I don't go over those. But with this very same mix, a bit weaker perhaps, I'm just going to suggest this wall, sorry, and it comes in again here. Leave some pockets of white paper too. Just leave some pockets of white paper like here, you know, maybe there's a part of that wall that's catching the light. The tonal value, it's not the darkest of darks, it's not the lightest of lights, it's somewhere in the middle. Now, 1, 2, 3 sheets of that sheeting, that steel sheeting. So we'll leave those out because we can have a bit of fun with those, perhaps work a bit of line into them a bit later, and certainly give them a different color. They are this lovely pale gray blue. So I wouldn't mind if we can, to try and sort of keep that. Now notice that all my brush strokes are horizontal because that's what we're looking at. The overall, the essence of that wall is a horizontal shape, whereas what's behind is a vertical shape. That can be dealt with as a separate issue, okay? Now, I think there's enough on there. So all we're doing really is nailing the big shapes. We're not really fussing with any detail type information at all. Okay. What I am going to do here, this is almost water now in the brush. Okay, I've just dunked my brush into the water. See how weak that is. That's just water. And let's take a little bit of weak blue, ultramarine blue again. And in some of these areas that will be our boulders, just randomly place some of that. That there are some very almost white looking shapes in those boulders and things, but they won't be white. Don't be tempted to paint them white. We very, very rarely use pure white in our paintings. So I did that with the blue, didn't I? A very weak gray like blue. Why don't we do something similar now with a very weak burnt sienna? A little bit less this time, a little bit less than the blue that we use. So only a smaller amount of the burnt sienna. And what we're doing is we're just setting everything up for more information that will come along further. I'm stopping and I'm looking and I'm sort of working out my next move. So I think this is okay. And what's going through my head at the moment is this. I've still got a wall there, haven't I? A nearer wall that I haven't put anything on into. And I think maybe we could just infer a few more boulders in that wall, because it is closer to us than that wall there. So let me just grab my paints. And it's going to take a very small amount of the phthalo green. I know I was just talking about the wall, but I just want to get something in the big areas here for a moment. So that tiny bit of phthalo green here. Now, if I'm very careful with it, it's a very bright green, and take a little bit of burnt sienna with it, okay, I'll get, believe it or not, a slightly yellow. Notice there wasn't a yellow on the color list, okay, because I wanted to show you how we can create more natural looking yellows by not using things like cadmium yellow, lemon yellows. We can avoid those. To put something bright, put a bright yellow into this painting just wouldn't work with the other colors, okay? So there's my, and after all, it's a green really that we're looking for. There's not much evidence of yellow in the painting. So I'm scrubbing in an area. Remember this shape, this sort of triangle over here. There's this sort of distorted rectangle here, all on a bit of a, there is a hint of diagonal, isn't there, here? So we come up to that line there. Remember this here, that band there, okay, is a vertical wall. So you see that I've painted, and you could certainly go into that wall with the green, no problem at all, a little bit, okay. Even in around some of those boulders there. But what I'm trying to keep us concentrating on is the simplicity of the bigger shapes. If we do start pushing, you know, all the colors into all the areas, we will lose that sense of the big shapes, and you can't, you daren't. Is there a hint? Certainly is a hint of greens in places. So just some vertical brush work. So I went over my building then. Some vertical brush work in here. Just a little bit. And at this stage, it's always, I always refer to this stage as the ugly stage. You know, it should look random. It shouldn't look clever. It shouldn't look sophisticated. And I think it's important that we appreciate that and accept it, because, you know, if there's one thing that makes us overwork a painting and spoil a painting, I think that's not having the patience of putting up with your painting at this ugly stage. We want to be seeing the finishing line from the first brush stroke, you know, and that's a big mistake. The underlying ugliness is a fantastic counterpoint for what goes on top. But I really mustn't forget about this wall here. Let's remind ourselves and just say, well, let's pencil in a few smaller, more horizontal brick-like shapes in this wall. So let's pick up that number 6 round brush, dunking it in the water. And I'm going to take some, I'm still working with watercolor paint for the moment. I can see what I mean now about dry paints making it really difficult to work. That would be okay if I just wanted to obliterate and use the whole amount, but it skins over, you see, and you can't pick it up. I can break into that one there. There's just about enough, but that one's gone way too dry. What I do a lot these days, actually, I'll show you now. I tend to work when I'm doing this dry brush technique with the small pointed brush. I tend to use a pickle jar lid, and that way I can keep the fresh paint dry. Because when it's in the, if you're using a palette, the likelihood is every time you pick up, when you're doing the initial stages, every time you pick up paint, you flood that little well and that paint with water. So to be able to do what I want to do now, you wouldn't be able to. There's just simply too much water in there. So I tend to just squeeze out a small amount of the two colors, in this case, ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, and use that as my mini palette. It ensures an absolutely dry brush mix. So dry, in fact, that it won't initially want to come off the brush. So what you do is then you find the smallest amount of water from somewhere, and I mean a really small amount. No, we're okay, I think. So that then becomes my dry brush mix. Let's put that out the way. And where am I going with this? Well, for the moment, I think we should establish the windows in the building for now. So a single hit for each of those marks, just copying my pencil work, really. There's a window here. There's a door on the front end of that building there. As I say, if you can, try to make these single hits, okay? Just a lintel on top of that roof there, that one there, maybe something across the, let me just move you right in close so you can see exactly what I'm doing here. We'll go out of focus for a moment. Okay, this is what I'm doing. Hang on, just pick up, you've got to keep on picking up this little miniature mix all the time, reloading it. So there's a doorway just above that wall there. I'm just putting a single nick in there. Okay, it's no more than like a sort of lozenge shape. This is a line at the edge of my building up there. A little bit of blue, a little bit of burnt sienna. And in this area here, let's have some fun in the area of the corrugated sheeting. I'm going to put some posts that separate those corrugated sheets, just a little vertical here. And it's a very hit and miss delivery of paint. Can you see that? You know, it's hence the name, you know, dry brush. That's exactly what it is. There's so little water in there that the paint doesn't actually want to come off the brush. So there's a post here, a post there. Gets to a point where you've got to find a tiny bit of moisture from somewhere just to get the paint off the brush. And then there's this end here. So there are my posts. I'm going to run a couple of horizontal lines to show the corrugated effect through those sheets. Just a few, not all the way down or all the way along. Just a few broken lines like this. It is important that if we got this vertical directly behind it, that this stuff appears horizontal by juxtaposition, just to show both off as different areas. Now there's a top of a wall about here, so I'll just run along there with this. Remember, we still got this wall in front of us, and I think I'm going to sort of delineate that a little better. Tiny bit of water from somewhere. Both my burnt sienna and my ultramarine blue colors. Put a bit more burnt sienna in my little miniature palette here. This is quite a nice bit because you can actually take your time on this. It's quite a relaxing thing to do. I would say top of this wall about here somewhere. There's a little bit more water now in this mix because I need to make slightly longer lines. So a little bit more water will help me to do that. Again, across here, something like this, break it up. Remember, this wall has a bottom line to it where it meets the grass. That's about here somewhere. Pops up in various places. And perhaps we can just go around the lower edges of some of these boulders now with the same mix. Now, a lot of this mix will dissolve later because we'll be putting further washes down. And some of this that I'm doing now will actually disappear. You won't see it. Well, it'll disappear. It'll partially disappear. It'll be underlying, which gives your painting a nice bit of depth. I'll try and point it out at the end of the painting. You know, I'll sort of say, well, do you remember when we put some line around here? It's not obvious anymore at the end of the painting, but there's something there that tells you there's some depth there. So I'm not going over the tops of these boulders and rocks. I'm tending to go to around the base of them, as you'd expect to find that to be a more shadowy sort of area. And it's an opportunity, if you can see this, when I run a line like this around the base of these stones and rocks, there's an opportunity to join one rock to the other with a simple line like this, you know, over to that one, maybe up to that one, cross to that one. As I say, it's like drawing again. It's like having the pencil back in your hand, only this time with a brush and paint. Now then, I'm going to show you a slightly different technique for what I'm about to do next. I was talking earlier about the wall, the furthest walls, this one here and the one slightly above. Same mix, okay, I haven't changed the colors, the paint colors at all, but what I am going to do is take the palette back here, dunk this brush into my water just lightly and roll that brush around on its side on the belly like this, okay? A bit more water. And this will allow me to, I want a bit more blue in this mix. This will allow me now to further texture some of these areas back here. There's a funny area back here, just behind the corrugated sheet. And I think I'm going to have to put something in there for tonal value and then think about the color that I might want in there later. So I just put some broken delivery there, run a finger into there a little bit. And sorry, back into the wall with a lot of water. And this is the belly of the brush. What I mean by that, of course, is it's the side of the brush here. Okay, not the point. And you need to, the way to do this, if you try to do that by holding a brush in you know, as we might hold a pen, you won't be able to use the belly of the brush. It won't let you do that. What you've got to do to use the belly of the brush, put your brush down on the flat surface like this, pick it up, and don't let the brain, the subconscious, turn it around, because that's what it wants to do, because it's so, your hand is so used to holding a pen to write with that the subconscious, the muscle memory makes you do that without you even thinking. Slightly distracted, you're wondering what's going on over in the palette or looking at your painting, and the hand has turned it around again like that. Really got to fight that off, because the only way, as I say, to use the belly of the brush properly is to hold it like this. There's nothing there that could make full contact flat on the surface of the paper. It's a really, you know, I always think that sort of separates the beginner or the amateur to the professional. It is being confident by using the belly of the brush and holding the brush this way. So as you can see, I'm choosing areas just to add a little bit more texture here. So I'm not obliterating the entire wall. I'm just making sure that it looks broken through here. I think we ought to get some blue into the corrugated sheeting. I think that will sort of lift things. It's time to give ourselves a little bit of a boost. So let's have some pretty just through the corrugated sheeting. So take a little bit of clean ultramarine blue from my little mini palette. Quite a bit of water in that. Just run some paint, just deliver the paint for a moment, okay? Just like that, just 3 strokes, one for each corrugated panel. and then my brush is dunked in the water over here. And I'll just skim, just be a bit creative and just skim the belly of the brush with water into those corrugated sheets. And the aim is not to obliterate the entire corrugated sheet, but just more like we did with the wall, just deliver a broken wash, mini wash, if you like. So I think we need to go possibly to the top, more to the top of those corrugated sheets. That's a very, you know, like a lot of this stuff is, particularly at this stage in the painting, a lot of this is very intuitive. You just got to say, well, I need to stop now, otherwise I'm just going to have a very flat blue shape there. So, okay. Yeah, that just offers a little bit of jolly, a little bit of cleanish color, you know, not fully saturated, but certainly a slightly cleaner color than what's on here so far. So I'm referring to my photo for some clues and ideas. Yeah, and I really like, I'll tell you what I have picked up on with this photo. There seems to be a wooden fence directly in front of the house. Now, in my photo, that's a sort of dark chestnutty brown color, sort of reddy color. So I'm going to make more of that. I'm going to use burnt sienna, but I'm going to add perhaps a little bit. Actually, let's just use the burnt sienna and see how it registers before I talk about, because there's already a color on there. It's quite an abstract sort of shape over here. There's a little bit in the wall there. I'd quite fancy that, or something in that right hand side. It could be a rusty old fence. But yeah, that again, you see, just as the blue in the corrugated sheet lifted the area, this lifts it even further by a bit of clean saturated color. I haven't contaminated that color too much with anything else. Okay, now then, when I look at these wonderful winter bushes that come down here, and it's offering a gentle, there's a slight diagonal in this design, in this movement. I see a bit of a boring-ish color for a lot of that. So I think we've got alizarin crimson on our color list. So I think we're going to have a bit of fun with burnt sienna and a little bit of alizarin crimson. We'll see how that sits in the balance of things. So we want to get onto using some acrylic inks in a moment. So I'll show you what I'm doing here. Bit of burnt sienna, bit of this alizarin crimson that I've just placed, and I mean a small amount. And if I describe that color, it's a sort of lovely peach color. And I'm going to go with the direction of the object, which is vertical, if you remember, from the pencil marks. And I'm going to pull the belly of the brush vertically down. Don't really want to go behind with that. I'm going to choose that area there and pull this beautiful color down through here. It's amazing how a bit of saturated color starts to lift the whole scene. Now, we may go too far. You can sort of go too bright. That's really your choice. It's how I liken it to sort of choosing how much sugar or no sugar or whatever it is we put with our food or our teas and our coffees. It's like that. We will all have slightly different ideas as to what we prefer. So, but what I'm doing, more to the point here, is sometimes I'm just picking up one of those two colors, and in this case, as I speak, I've just picked up the alizarin crimson. So again, it's a broken color. It may overall look like a peachy color, but that's a distance thing. That's because of the viewing distance. It looks like an overall sort of color, but slightly closer and you'll see the separate colors. And the of the two, the alizarin crimson is the cooler of the two colors. And given that this area back here is a bit further away from us, I think it's only right that the alizarin crimson is used more back there, okay? And that the burnt sienna is brought in, as I'm doing now, more here. That really works well for suggesting depth. Color temperature is a powerful tool for creating depth. Yeah, it's referred to, or used to be referred to a lot in some of the older books, as aerial perspective, you know, as opposed to linear perspective, of course, geometrical perspective. Color temperature was referred to as aerial perspective. So it just simply means now that perhaps that's not as special as it was, because it's not now the only bit of saturated color in the painting. But, you know, early days, we can still adjust things accordingly. So just making sure I like that shape there now. Quite a bit stronger maybe at the top of that shape. And then a little bit darker there. Okay, I think we should, before we do, so we should move on to using some of these other materials. Before we do, and if I can find that card I had, to further the effects of this area as a different area to the others, why don't we run some vertical scrapes through in places, okay? Make block shapes if you want. The edges will always suggest that it's vertical, because wherever that card stops will leave you with a vertical line, okay? And I think we will go over those again anyway towards the end. So can we leave the building to the very last or not? I mean, in terms of, you know, putting color on. Well, I think we can for the walls, but I think maybe we should consider something for the roofs. So at this stage, now nothing in the rule books sort of say that's when this is the time to do the roof of the building. Again, I find it difficult to explain why I've left it till now, if I'm perfectly honest. I think it's because I have a rule of thumb, and that is to stay out of the focal point territory for as long as possible, okay? But now that it's coming, everywhere else is taking form, I think there comes a point where the needle on the meter sort of goes, hang on, you know, it will look more imbalanced now if you do something about the roof. So that's what I'm going to do. And this is a mix, again, of ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, and it's a flattish application I'm using at the moment. Don't go into the chimneys, leave them pale for the moment. Now we know that the other little roofs on these dormers or whatever they are up here are the same color, but you know, it's really important to change the tone of them because they're at a different angle to the main part of the roof. So if you add a little bit more water to those, okay, it will look better. You'll be able to differentiate between this angle here to the one that's coming down the main part of the roof. It's catching more light. Okay, so it'd be like that. Right. Now I should have, and I'll just do it very quickly, I should have given us a slightly stronger dry brush line underneath these, underneath the eaves here. There. Okay. And again, this is just sort of simple embellishment. It's not, I've got to take that roof just a bit further this way. That's better. And I think for, as far as the building goes, at least, we're probably on track again. So let's have a look at some other materials. I think it is time to put some crayon, oil crayon on. Now, again, if you're using water-soluble crayons, dry pastel, Try putting them in as I'm doing now at this stage, okay? I'm still looking, sorry, I'm still spotting areas I should have done with the dry brush here, just delineating the edges of our roofs in places on the building. There's a chimney pot on top of those two. Okay, I'm fiddling, stop fiddling. Yeah, let's get the oil crayon going. So we have, it's no sort of, it wasn't a random idea to choose these colors. If you've already probably spotted, basically these are the primary colors, albeit the red or pink. They are the primary colors: blue, red or pink, and yellow. Okay, so I want some abstract thinking going on here, folks. So just run, and it will act as a resist. Remember, nothing's going to change this color once it's on. So bear that in mind. Be a little bit careful. Once this is on, if you are using water soluble versions, then expect this stuff to move around when we put further washes. And that could be great. You know, you could end up with the best painting of all of us at the end of the day. But that's the point I make about mixed media. There are no real set rules. It's all about in invention and creativity, and you know, the serendipity. You just might get that bit of magic. So I'm just mainly concentrating around the foreground, if I'm honest. I don't want to put too much resist beyond the foreground because, well, trust me, it won't look correct back there. Just a little bit maybe around the house. It's a very random intuitive thing, this. Now I'd like something in these, I'd like to create some verticals down here where we said these, you know, we need a bit of vertical down here because the vertical's further back in the scene. So a little bit of vertical in places. So that's my red. Let's turn our attention to a little bit of yellow. I won't use as much of this, just a little bit here and there. We can imagine that this is like the lichens and mosses that grow on these ancient old boulders and rocks and things. And then, right, the blue. Why don't we try it in the, just a couple of strokes of that blue in the corrugated sheet there, just one or two. It's not a full measurement from one end of this shape to the other. It's a partial horizontal, I was going to call it a brush stroke then, but it's the same sort of principle. It's a brush stroke effectively. Okay, and then we might be able to tie this blue in if it were to travel down bottom of the wall here into the foreground a little bit. And this helps, you know, I haven't used this term for a long time, but the threading, the knitting together of one shape to the other. If you can choose a line or a color and a line and say, well, you know, this is almost like a little road. It's like looking down on an aerial map. And this little color here chases its way down through the landscape onto the top of the wall there, down in through the wall here, onto the boulders. It's a great way of making sure that your painting is knitting and pulling together. So I'm coming this direction. This is the blue oil crayon. You could do with this, you'd be doing this with ink. Even a pen, you know, I know I didn't put a pen on the list, but for another day, we'll perhaps do, you know, the next mixed media, we'll have a different array of materials. So I think I'm okay with this. I've created that little bit of threading. Comes in from the right to the left, comes in from the left to the right, maybe. A little bit through the background. But as I say, you don't want to put too much of this texture too far back. It's mainly, the lion's share of this stuff is really for the foreground. Okay, put those aside for a moment. And let's do a little bit. Let's think now on inks. Let's have a look at those inks. I'm going to clean my palette off here. So, not that it would matter, you know, I could leave this little bit of paint on that palette while I use the inks, but I just want to, certainly for you folks, to see just the huge difference, the intensity of ink compared to other mediums. And if I leave that watercolor on there to contaminate that, you're not going to get the benefit of that. I give it a good shake because it has a habit of settling, a sediment settling at the bottom there. So good old shake. And I'll put a small amount out on my palette. I mean, a small amount. This stuff is incredibly intense. Okay. And I'm going to just pre-wet an area around here, around these areas. Now, this is what I mean about going over your oil pastels with a good quality brush. This isn't a particularly expensive brush. What I'm going to do, I'm mostly sort of tapping the water on, and in any way, I think that makes for a far more interesting delivery of ink rather than brush it around. So I'll tap this water into this area, and now I'm going to pick up the ink. Okay, make sure everything's in shot because I've zoomed in, of course. So there's me picking up the ink. I'm going to do the same with the ink. Look at that. Just tap it onto those areas, and take a second to see what it's doing before you just don't just sort of methodically keep tapping stuff into the area. Stop every now and again, see how much effect it's having. Need a little bit more over here for a moment. We can always put more on later. I think that the warning, the tip here is to say, do a bit, stop. You can always do it again rather than overload it too early. I'm going to do the same with the black ink here. Give it a shake. So once again, take a little bit of, it doesn't matter if it integrates, which it's going to do with my first color. Just put out a small amount here. That goes on top like this. Okay. And I'm going to go into this wall, paint around, carefully paint around any boulder. Avoid losing the boulder's shapes in front, sorry. Now, if we're not careful, by creating such a strong horizontal here, there's no way through to the house. So I'm going to play the strength of this down just about here. And it'll be like sort of saying, yeah, if you want to get to the house, this is where you go. This, even though there's a mark there on top of the wall, okay, we can sort of say, look, there's a way through this strong horizontal to get further into the painting. But I mean, this is good. I mean, this is just a spontaneous idea. And there it is. I'll have to probably zoom out again in a moment. But at the moment, I think you're probably getting a pretty good view of what's happening down here. So there's a bit of spattering. Remember what I said about these areas here in the foreground? They're peaceful, restful areas. So if they did get a bit busy from spattering and things like that, just run as I'm doing here and declutter. A little bit of that spatter down there doesn't do any harm at all. I certainly intend to bring out the spatter some white gouache towards the end of the painting anyway. Okay. Now what's occurring to me now is I'm thinking, wow, it is busy. There's such a busy area here. Got a couple of straggler shapes down here, shapes that I've managed to sort of overlook. So I'm going to borrow a little bit of paint that's still sitting on the surface and paint a couple of those extra bricks and shapes in. A little bit of shape to that one there, a little bit of shape into here. So I'm re-establishing more shapes that are easier to recognize. So the purpose of that early drawing is to keep things in focus because if you don't put in a good, strong design in the early stages, you're having to guess at this sort of thing that I'm doing now. You just sort of, you're making rather more random shapes, but I'm able to see the shapes that I put in with the pencil earlier. Okay, I think we need to do some line, to get some line work going again, okay, just to separate things. So this is what I'm going to do. This is what I do a lot. I've got all this ink, remember, still on the surface of the paper. I'm going to run the edge of that credit card into that ink. So effectively, I've got a little line on the edge of that card. And I'm just going to put some good, strong, picking up all the time, good, strong lines in places. Some over the top of that. Often this is no more than a push and a touch and a maybe even some through here like this. Let's move that apparently. So I'm scraping, move it about, sorry. So I'm scraping, have sort of lost that, but I think it's worth forfeiting one of these little restful areas down here. I'll come up here and do the same. Just holding the card on the surface, try and get my hand out the way to show you what I'm doing. I've loaded the edge of this card, okay, and I make contact with the paper, and I'll just turn it like this. It's great, it's great. It really, it's surprising how natural that can look. And again, maybe over here, perhaps we ought to go a little bit darker on this wall here. Now it's taking shape. Now I can see the foreground, and now the midground and distance is being pushed further back again. So, but is that ink is one thing you've got to watch out with ink is it's so intense, it will flatten things. It's okay if you need an area of flatness, and sometimes we do, but I think we should just scrape out before this dries off, scrape out a little inference here and there to put a couple of these stones that are in the wall are picking up a bit of light that's bouncing around the place there, just to take the flatness out. Okay, maybe there's a little vertical again in front of that. I'm really pressing so hard, I'm almost trying to damage the paper. Just as though there's a couple of sticks, the remains of an old fence just popping up in front of that there. Okay, now then, the vertical is up here along that line. I've cut my card, and you can still do it any time. In fact, I might cut it down a little bit smaller, because if you look at that edge, it's possibly too big a measurement in some places. So I'm going to... So I cut them to shape as I need them. And with this, again, I'm just going to reinstate some of those. So I'm picking up, let me show you again. I'm just picking up ink on the edge of that card, and I'm manipulating some verticals back here and dragging them sideways now and again. I think what we ought to do now, as I'm doing this, other ideas are entering my head. Yeah, I think what I'm going to do is this. Look, if we look at how light, relatively speaking, this horizontal is here, I think we can go a lot darker here. It's either we go darker here or we go darker immediately behind the house again. But I think if we were to go dark behind, there would be an awkwardness in terms of, dark colors tend to sort of pull things forward. And if we do that too much in the background, let's put a little bit of warmth in there a second. If we do that in the background, there'll be this weird, really strange, uncomfortable effect of things in the background teetering towards us. So I'm going to plumb for bit more of the ink. Let's just deliver it for a moment, okay? Deliver it any fashion you like. A horizontal delivery, but straight in, straight in, this is ink, with vertical brush marks, okay? And in a moment, you'll see me pick up the credit card again, and we'll get some of those verticals back in there. When I get to these, I put a lot more water in. It's much weaker back there, much paler, okay? Now let's get the card again on here. So don't get too, now this is really a potential area where we enjoy making some marks with the card, and before we know it, we've made way too many, much too much texture. Let's if you really have to, count the amount of marks and effect you have on this. Here's one idea here. Just scrape there. There's one mark. Okay. Here's my second mark. Let's take it across the top on over here somewhere. Drag it down before we finish. And then we stop and say, how's that looking? Yeah, I think that might be a bit heavy. So we'll scrape through there again and maybe leave it like that, okay? Why don't we take one tree out of here, edge of the card, and let's take out a winter tree just popping up like this. This is good. I like this idea that suddenly occurred. Okay. Because it might mean we want a smaller version back here, breaks up the all important vertical in a powerful horizontal. When everything's looking horizontal, you so need something vertical. And the same can be said, vice versa. If your painting and your design is predominantly horizontal, predominantly vertical, you will need to put some contrast by horizontal into your painting. Right, okay. I'm really enjoying this bit here. It's working well. And that would never have worked well if we'd have busied up the background, as and suggested there was sky up there, there was a hillside, which there is, of course, we can see it in the photo. But if we were to have done that, no way would what we're doing now looked so effective, so good. Right, okay, we're very nearly getting towards the finished article here, folks. Let me just, a little practical tip. Make sure you put your inks somewhere out of the way and safe with their tops back on. I have some painful memories of times when I'd forgotten to do that. Just going to pick up a rigger brush for a moment and sticking with the ink again. I think we should, so this is a rigger brush, and I press it with my fingertips like this, okay? Press it flat, if you can see, sorry, I'll hold it down here, see it better. I press it flat and you can see it's splayed. So that'll allow me to put a smaller version of what's going on at the background there. Okay, through here again, a little bit of that through the corrugated sheet. Now, my only area, before I finish this painting, my only area of concern is still this sort of wall here. It's the right shape, it's a good horizontal, but I think we've got to suggest that it is more, we've got to make more of a suggestion that it is a wall and not a flat bit of grass. Now, forgive me a moment, I'm just taking off something that I know I'm going to put my hand in if I'm not careful. It's just a little collection of ink. So I'm thinking this. Let's just create a couple. I'll take, this is where we can literally mix the mediums here. There's a bit of watercolor, pull that bit of ink into it. Okay, make a sort of grayed down version of the burnt sienna, and let's have some. I'll be a little bit careful. This is something I you've got to be so careful. This is a random. It's just a random couple of shapes, a random couple of faces of stones in the wall to make it look like what it's supposed to look like. That's actually that's come out okay. And I never, you know, I never stop. If the idea enters my head, I always just do it. I never question that idea. I think that's fatal. I think that's when things start falling apart and we start losing the momentum that we need, that essential momentum that we need to keep the confidence level up through the process. All right. Not sure about these now. It's funny, isn't it? I mean, that was one of the main, that was really, to me, that really caught my eye, the steel sheets. But I think we need to play them down a little bit before we get to the final work on the house, which is just going to be a simple shadow effect over there. So what do they need? Do we need to do it now? Can we leave it towards the end of the painting? I think I need to see the tonal. I think maybe what it is, it's three things too much the same, isn't it? So why don't I say this one isn't getting as much light as the other two? So we'll do something like this. Maybe part of that second one also a little bit. I think that already that's a little bit better. The one I chose to diminish in terms of attention is the one furthest away from the focal point. Okay, as we move towards the focal point, things remain quite noticeable. Okay, again, that's just that's one of the compositional design sort of things going on. You got to remember that how important the focal point is and how we sort of protect it through the process until we get to near the end of the painting. Right, okay. I tell you what I'm going to do. I think this will help. The mount. I'm going to get that out because I tell you why. If with everything else going on around you when you're working is a distraction, just isolate this for a moment with the mount, and it's amazing how that pops out answers that you can't see when all this is going on. Right, and I'll zoom out. I'll just zoom out and refocus. Oops. That's better. So what the mount allows me to do is to see it in perspective, literally, you know, sort of in balance, sorry. Yeah, not in perspective. So I'm trying to envisage what it'll look like when I've done the final work, which is shadow out, is decide that, you know, the light in this painting, the light source, light direction, when I took this photo those years ago, the light was behind me. So it illuminated everything, okay? It illuminated everything this side of me. But that doesn't make for a particularly interesting, it doesn't show the light off, actually, strangely enough. So I'm envisaging perhaps a little bit of shadow. Maybe maybe if we'd stayed here for another half an hour to an hour, some would have moved over here and there would have been some shadow falling on this building from the left-hand side. That would make for a much more interesting design. Okay, take the flatness out of this house. Can you see how at the moment, if we left the house like this, it almost looks like the house is an afterthought. It was cut out with a pair of scissors and stuck on the rest of the painting. But a shadow will bring depth and form and 3 dimension to an otherwise flat looking shape. So let's do that. So let me just get rid of the ink here. And I'll probably need to put out a bit of fresh ultramarine blue. Make sure the 1-inch flat brush, which is what I'm going to use to apply the shadow, is clean. I'm just rinsing that out. And here we go. Let's put in ultramarine blue. Not too much, but I'm using a garden pea size, I suppose, amount of paint. I'll start by taking that into the main area of the mixing well, all of it. Make sure it's broken down. There's no sticky pigment in there. And I'll take a small amount of the the alizarin crimson. So we end up with a purple here, okay? But that, of course, I think, would be too bright that's too artificial for this particular shadow color. So what I do is I take a little bit of burnt sienna here, and that will just gray that purple down a little bit, as you can see there, okay? Right, with that all ready to go, wherever I decide to put this shadow, reminding ourselves, light's coming from here, from the left. If I don't like what I've got, I just, with this tissue in my other hand, I would just lift it straight back out, okay? So let's get the practical brain on board and say, well, if light's coming from the left, anything vertical is bound to be casting a shadow over this, over the house. But I'm going to play real safe. And one thing I certainly could do before I apply the big brush is take a small amount of that, oops, wrong brush. Take a small amount of that shadow that I just mixed and go on this side of the roof lines, etc. And this is going to be mostly in shadow, the gable end, shadowed here. That would be shadow, wouldn't it? That would be shadow down here, through here. Little hit of warmth in the shadow, with just very quickly picked up a bit of burnt sienna. I know this is quite a speedy sort of way of painting, but as I say, you know, one of the essential skills to painting loose style is to get yourself practiced and rehearsed in how to quickly pick up different colors and different strengths of paint. So here we go. Let's say the shadow is mostly over here, definitely shadow into there. There'd be a shadow off this building, something like that. Put a bit more in there. I'm going to leave the roof mostly as it is, but a little bit of shadow from that little dormer. So we would expect there to be shadow behind the house, onto those areas. This shadows across from the tree onto this area here. I don't really want to shadow that nice red. So it will say that the whatever it is, you know, casting the shadow up here is not casting a shadow onto, that could be a cloud, it could be a woodland out of sight over here. So we have options all the time in terms of design. I think we should shadow out more of this area here. So we'll shadow this wall. And this is what I meant about these now. Great idea initially, but I'm questioning that part of the design all the time. I think we should mostly shadow that area there through here, and we'll leave just that panel there. That look, actually, for whatever reason, that looks more like the photograph anyway. So, and then in the foreground, we'll shadow out parts of this. Now, when you shadow out the next wall, the next horizontal, you must go around the boulders that are in front of it, okay? And if you can, leave a little line of light on the top of that wall. So think about the bottom edge of the brush mark you're making and the top edge. So again, look at, I'm going to stop here. I'm not going to go into this section of the wall because I think this light movement through here takes us in. And then finally with this shadow mix, I think we can shadow that out. Somehow the shadow has to get down to the foreground by hook or by crook. So I'm going to bring it through here. And then a quick swipe across there. This can be a lot softer, remember, because this is a soft area, but the color should be there. So I just dunk my brush very quickly in my water, and I'm going to soften that shadow edge. There's the vertical there of the from the grasses, the dead grasses. Now I'm going to get the white gouache with my rigger brush. So here's the rigger brush. And I'm going to spatter some sunshine into my painting. Actually, I'll put the rigger brush down for a moment. I'll start the spattering with the number 6 round brush. And what I do is I simply, once you got the top off the paint tube of white, just push that brush directly into the paint here. You might need to, I just use the masking tape edge of my my painting here just to roll that paint around into the fibers of the brush. Now I hold the brush back here and lightly hold it between thumb and middle finger, and that allows me to tap that texture, that sort of white texture. I mean, this actually was an autumn scene. But it's what you want. But what it does for the painting is fantastic. It just really adds a sort of light to it. It's particles, airborne particle. But more than that, it's good for the painting. It makes the painting look a little bit special, a little bit better. So there we are. And you could, this is one of those things you can almost not do too much of. And I say almost, my caveat, you can almost not do too much of, because what happens is 80%, maybe thereabouts, of this white spatter will go into the paper in quite quickly, in an hour, and in an hour's time you might only see some of it. You can always redo it if you really liked it and thought, well, do you know, it looked really good an hour ago before that paint disappeared. You can always redo that until you eventually get it to exactly where you want it. So the final move here is for me now to look at the rigger brush and just say, you know, is there any area here perhaps that I could lift? I don't think there's much call for this, but you know, on the odd little nick up there in the tree where there might be some dampness on that tree that's catching a bit of light. Maybe a part of this wall is slightly more illuminated. But I would certainly give the lion's share of this, what I'm doing now, which is just sort of subtle nuances to the focal point territory. Let's suggest that one of those chimney pots is catching the light, all right, on top of that chimney stack. The actual chimney pots in the photo are sort of like a brick red color. I don't think that would just get lost in that tonal value area. So I'm saying its local color might be red, but it's the light that, it's the color of the light that we can see. That's what you see on the top of that chimney stack. So I think we're there, folks. I'm going to put the mount back around it. And weigh it up. And do remember that whatever you've got at the end of this session, you can either continue to work it tomorrow, and I often do, especially with mixed media paintings like this. I often put them aside for sometimes as much as 2 or 3 days, and I revisit them. And what I can't see today, because it's all so fresh in my head, what I can't see today, I can often see 2 days later, or even just a day later, and I think, right, what that needs is this or that. But let's put the mount back around it. And, you know, let's do the little tick box thing, the little, list. Tonal values, color temperatures, shapes, balance, design, composition, focal point, the 7 things there. Certainly at the top of that list is tonal value. Okay. Are the tones good? I think the tones lead us to the focal point, simply because if you look at this foreground, how much brightness there is in the foreground, and the gap, that all important gap here, okay, through that paler area here, takes us to the whitest of all the shapes, and that's that one there. Now, the same could be done in reverse. If everything was really dark around here, sorry, if everything was very pale, and light, then you'd use dark tones to get you to a dark spot here. That's just as effective. It's your shout at the end of the day. But what I'm looking for, as I say, is the way we read it. When we imagine that we've just walked into a gallery and this is on the wall somewhere. I always try to think like that. I think, would this grab my attention? If it grabs my attention, it's probably, first of all, because of the tonal values in it. And you wander over, you take a closer look, and then you're asking yourself, what is it you like about it? Oh, look, I'm taken through this sort of journey of movement in a clockwise direction, but you always sort of come down and come back up. You always end up on the focal point.